Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net. And today I'm doing a collaboration video with Michael. He has a YouTube channel called Phase Evolution. It's all about astral projection, lucid dreaming, and similar topics.
Yeah, hey, I'm Mike, and I run Phase Evolution. I started this community 6 or 7 months ago just to try to find like-minded people to share these types of experiences with.
Cool. All right, so where do you think that we might start the conversation at? Anything you want to start with, or?
Actually, I like your questions about the biggest impediments that you've experienced to reaching an out-of-body experience. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, so maybe we start there.
Yeah, that sounds good. So basically, what would you say has been your biggest obstacle to reaching, having an out-of-body experience or reaching sleep paralysis?
Honestly, I would say that changes from time to time. So when I very first started, I would say that the biggest challenge was just not swallowing. So everybody tells you, you just got to lay there completely still, don't move, don't swallow, don't do anything that would possibly tell your body that you're still, or tell your mind that your body is still awake. So I finally found a fix for that. I prop my head up and I look down almost so I'm looking straight down at my feet, and it prevents me from having to swallow. But then I got past that point, and then I would say probably the biggest challenge for maybe the next 6 months was learning to keep my mind awake while my body falls asleep. That was one of the toughest things to learn how to do, and that honestly just takes practice.
Yeah, definitely. I find that a lot of times if I try to do it purposefully, because for me, a lot of times it'll happen on accident, but if I'm actually trying to purposefully induce it, my biggest problem is that I just end up going to sleep and like nothing happens, So yeah. I've definitely had the same type of issue.
I spent over a year dedicating my lunch breaks to practicing this. So I would go out to the parking lot at lunch, and I would lay down in the back of my minivan, and I would set my alarm for 15-minute intervals, which sounds ridiculous. But so I'd lay down in my minivan, and every 15 minutes my alarm would go off just in case I did happen to fall asleep. And I would just try to put my body to sleep over and over and over again. And I did that for a little over a year. Just every day, that was my practice at lunch. And it took me a good 6 months to really get the hang of it. Because it's not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a difficult thing, but it's more like you're reprogramming your mind to do something different than you've done your entire life, because you're used to just letting your body fall asleep, letting your mind fall asleep first. And so you need to change the order up, and it's just like reprogramming yourself. It's trying to build a new habit. So it takes a lot of intent and a lot of practice, but if you can put that kind of dedication into it, I wouldn't say it's really a difficult thing to learn how to do.
Yeah, most definitely. It's one of those things that it's sort of like lucid dreaming is in that sense. As long as you're doing the practice, it will eventually happen. And I find that for me now, what I do is I just kind of set an alarm for like a certain amount of time, like into sleep. Like I try to like time it for when my REM cycles fall. So anything like 70 to 90 minutes, like every 70 to 90 minutes during the night, I could potentially try to have one. And so I set my alarm and then wake up, turn off the alarm real quick, and then be very still. And I've been pretty successful with that. A lot of times I still get them like spontaneously, and that's like my main thing. But that's becoming a bit more difficult now for me because I co-sleep with 2 kids, and so it's very, very hard. It's a bit of an impediment to the practice in and of itself, but I still have them from time to time.
Yeah, co-sleeping with anybody is an impediment.
Oh yeah.
I mentioned in a previous video, and I don't know if you saw that one or not, that one of the things that's pushed my progress forward almost probably more than anything else is my wife and I actually now have separate beds.
Oh yeah.
We had one big large bed, and there were times where I would just be laying awake and I would be practicing, and I would just get almost to the point where my body's asleep, and my wife would roll over and she's asleep, and I would feel horrible in the morning because I was just really frustrated, and I would take it out on her.
Oh yeah.
And she's trying to sleep the way that she's supposed to be sleeping. So she, being the great sport that she is, we got 2 twin beds, and they're about maybe an inch apart from each other, maybe half an inch, but it's enough where her movement, I don't feel it at all.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Now, when my kids get up past the age where they're like co-sleeping with me, I think that might be a good thing, or at least to have like a separate bed or something where I can go to, because it really is very difficult, you know, when you have another person there that you have to kind of be thinking about. And I find that, like, because I'm sleeping next to kids, you know, and fairly small kids, it's like I always have this awareness that I can't move too far. And so I don't think I ever quite really go through the sleep cycle properly. So that probably has an impact too, because I find that in recent years, one of my biggest problems has been that I've been having a hard time remembering my out-of-body experiences. It's never a problem that I had before, up until, like I said, several years ago. You know, before it was always very crisp and clear and, you know, very memorable, you know, even if it was something small that happened. And now it's in that stage where it's like, ooh, I remember very clearly something happening, but now I don't remember it fully. Like, you probably had that with dreams before, but it was that the same way, but with an out-of-body experience.
Huh, yeah, interesting. You know, you mentioned the wake back to bed method, where you set an alarm to try to catch your REM cycle, and you wake up and then you try to hold still and try to induce one of these things. Do you practice in your bed, or do you get up and you move to another location?
No, I just practice in my bed.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of keep my phone underneath my pillow, and then that way I can just grab that real quick and then stay very still.
Oh, okay. I was going to say that's one of the things that helps me out quite a bit, is if I separate my projection space from my sleeping space. And I don't know if you've ever tried that, but I got the idea from William Buhlman. So I was reading his book, and he has what he calls a projection couch.
Oh, yeah.
And he goes and he lays down on his couch, and that's his standard place to project. And that way, when he's laying on his couch, his mind, subconsciously, his mind says, oh, I'm about to project because I'm laying on the couch, versus going to bed and his mind says subconsciously, oh, it's time to sleep because I'm laying in bed. And if he keeps those two spaces separate, then he has more success. And I've actually found that helps quite a bit. I go downstairs in the middle of the night and I'll lay on the recliner, and it does a couple of things. So first, it keeps me from being too comfortable, so I don't fall too deeply asleep, which is a good thing. You kind of want to hover on that awake asleep threshold.
Oh, yeah.
And then the other thing is, like I said, it's not my bed, so my mind doesn't immediately associate that with sleep.
Yeah, definitely. No, that sounds like a really great idea. And actually, I find that my more autonomous out-of-body experiences of the recent years have happened when I was on the couch, or when I've been sleeping in the other bedroom that I don't normally sleep in. So I wonder if it's even just the unfamiliarity factor too, like the degree to which, like, ooh, something's a little bit off, but so it keeps you maybe like just a little bit more alert. I don't know, that's just kind of a thought that I have relative to it.
Oh, I think that's definitely valid, because I tend to have good experiences when I go camping, or I've actually gone and laid down in my daughter's bed because, you know, my wife will be sick or something, and so it's hard to sleep next to her, so I'll go and lay down in my daughter's bed after she's already woken up for the morning, or, you know, things like that. And just being in an unfamiliar location does seem to help the process.
Yeah. If you had to give one piece of advice to somebody who's trying to induce sleep paralysis for the first time, or have an astral projection experience for the first time, what would that be?
That is an easy one, because it's something I struggled with for a really long time. And I would say the best piece of advice I could give you is to learn to love the process. You have to learn to love much more than just the results, because so many of your attempts are just going to end in failure.
Oh, yeah.
or what you might perceive as failure because you don't make it out of body or something like that. But you have to learn to love meditation. You have to learn to love the whole relaxation process. You have to learn to love all the crazy sensations that you go through between awake and asleep. You have to learn to love the noise and the vibrations and the periodic voices that you hear and the music that you hear, and just the random crazy stuff. And if you can learn to love all of that, then whether or not you make it to that final state, and whether or not you have that out-of-body experience, it'll keep you from getting frustrated. Because in my early days, there were multiple times where I just wanted to quit. I just thought, you know, it's taken me 4 months to get my next experience, and then maybe I've got another 4 months before I'll have another experience. And it just felt like I was really pushing really, really hard and trying really, really hard for something that was so unattainable.
Yeah, no, I think that's the most wonderful piece of advice actually that you could give, because for me, I know that it's been very frustrating with both trying to get an astral projection experience and to try to lucid dream, because it's like once you finally get there after trying so hard, or after a long stretch of not having them, you know, then it's like, oh, I have to make the best of this experience. It has to be the most, and then, you know, you get too excited or too, you know, and it just ended up messing up the experience. I find that I snap out of the sleep paralysis state very quickly if I get too excited or too adamant about having this or that experience. Or I'll just get out of body and I just can't move, or I lose control of my body to where I just can't be very autonomous in the state.
Yeah, with lucid dreaming, I would say you're like you said, it's exactly the same thing. You have to just learn to love dreaming in general, and then when you have a lucid dream, it's like a bonus.
Yeah, that's a great
So
way to think of it.
write down all of your dreams, enjoy all of your dreams, look forward to going to bed at night, because just, you know, expect that you're going to have amazing dreams. And when you have a lucid dream, then it's just a plus. So if you can learn to love the process, it'll keep you from getting frustrated. It'll allow you to continue focusing on it. Just like, you know, it takes practice to learn an instrument or learn a language. It takes practice to do this. And if you can learn to love all of the practice, then you'll be able to stick with it and get results.
That's great advice. I so wish I had that piece of advice when I first started out. That would make things so much more pleasant, because like I even still get frustrated sometimes, like if I get right there, or sometimes one thing that really discourages me is I'll be afraid, you know, like where it's like, oh no, not this time, you know, and I'll just snap myself out of it and go back to sleep, you know. So it's always like there was, oh man, I could have had a really awesome experience, you know. So I definitely think that learning to love the process is a great advice for beginners and for people who have been doing it for a long time.
So speaking of afraid, that makes me curious. What is it that you run into that makes you afraid? Because I'll be honest, that's one of the things that I've really run into when I started my channel that was surprising to me, is how many people are fearful of this type of process.
Well,
And some of them, I find some of them are maybe religious based, because their religion tells them it's wrong, or some of them believe demons are going to possess their bodies, or some of them believe they can't come back, or they'll be stuck out of body and they don't know what they're going to do if they can't get back again. What is it fear based that you've run into?
well, like I was talking to you about my first projection experience before we started filming, and so basically I started off with a creepy experience where basically I was staying the night over at my mom's house. I was facing the opposite direction of her, and you know, she started tickling me under the arms, and I basically just thought that my mom was being weird. It was way off character for her. But it just, the tickling sensation didn't stop when I told her to stop. It just kept getting tighter and tighter to where I knew, oh my God, this is not my mom back here. And then, you know, at the time I wasn't fully paralyzed, but the tighter that tickling sensation got, the more it was like I just couldn't move, and it was like 2 minutes of hell. And so it really scared me. And then, you know, so anytime after that, I had this like sort of preconceived notion in my mind that, oh my gosh, I just dealt with something like that. I was just being haunted or trying to be possessed by demons. I didn't know what sleep paralysis was, or astral projection, out of body experience. I didn't really know any of those things, that I could actually look to different resources to find out what was happening. So in my mind, it was every time demons. And so my teenage years, like most of my projections, were fairly negative. Like I always liked the fact that I had them, but they were always quite scary. Like there have been times where I've been drug out of bed by invisible force and had my limbs moved on their own. Or, you know, one time I walked up into the hallway and there was this man that was just completely made out of nails. And there was another time where like a kind of zombie-eyed version of my family were trying to get me to come into the other bedroom. That one actually happened just a couple years ago. And so I've had some scary experiences, but overall my experience with astral projection has just been overwhelmingly positive, you know. So I don't want to scare anybody away with those, but you know, it's enough to make me a little bit like nervous to have them sometimes, where I'm like, oh, do I want to run the risk this time? No, I'll just go back to bed. So that's like that probably sabotages me about 50% of the time, because I usually only like if I get sleep paralysis maybe twice a month to 3 times a month, maybe 1 or 2 of those times I might just opt to go back to sleep, you know?
Right. You know, you mentioned your mom tickling you. That's makes me actually think of something. So, when you feel a vibrational state now, is that anything like the feeling that you felt when you felt like your mom was tickling you?
You know, I guess there's a possibility there. Not till you mentioned it did I think about that being a possibility, but I didn't really feel vibrations at the time. The first time around, it was more like just the paralysis, and that's only really happened to me maybe a handful of times where I've gotten sleep paralysis without hearing anything or feeling anything. So I guess it's a possibility that maybe, you know, the vibrations weren't something that I was hearing but feeling, and it was that feeling that was giving me the impression. I mean, that is a possibility for sure.
Yeah, the reason I was curious is because that was my first experience with it as well. I mean, something kind of similar. So I was 13 years old, and I woke up and I'm laying there in bed facing the wall, and I felt like somebody was jabbing me in the lower back with like an electric cattle prod.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I felt these vibrations shooting from the base of my spine into my head, and I could have sworn there was somebody behind me just jabbing me and jabbing me, and I was terrified and I couldn't move. And as I lay there, it finally just faded away, and I rolled over and there was nobody there. And I had no idea what it was. There wasn't the internet back then, and I didn't even know what to research. I mean, I could have gone to the library and looked up people cattle prodding me in the back.
Yeah, exactly.
I had no idea. And so 20 years later, I came across the same exact sensation during my first out-of-body experience, and finally it clicked, and I said, it brought me back to that point when I was 13, and I said, I know exactly what was happening. And it didn't happen again for another 20 years, and now it's been, you know, dozens of times, but it's crazy that something like that can go so long in your life without you, you know, it happens and you don't recognize what it is until decades later.
Oh yeah, definitely. And actually, when I'm probably 4, 5, 6, I was a very small child. I was having this dream that my sister and I were climbing up on this like huge car jack. My father's a mechanic, and so that was kind of a common thing that we would see around a shop, you know, like those things that they get pretty tall, but this one was like way up in the air, like 200 feet. And so we were climbing up, and then I ended up falling off the car jack, and I was falling, and then I swore I woke up in midair and then hit the bed. And so for many years during my childhood, I was like, how on earth did that happen? And then after, you know, and then after I got to be a teenager and this was happening to me, and then I finally learned about, you know, sleep paralysis and, you know, the idea of out-of-body experience and, you know, knowing that this is an actual, like, thing that happens, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, you know, now I know that, you know, I was just an astral, just, and,
Right.
you know, just kind of landed on my bed and, you know, sort of snapped out of the state.
Yeah, oh, that's funny. I've done that exact same thing, but most of my falling sensations have been since I started practicing this, and so it wasn't a surprise to me, and I didn't wonder what it was. But I can completely relate with just the feeling of not knowing what's going on, and then finding out later.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So one of the things that you mentioned, or that I think a term that you've used, and I've heard other people use it as well, is unconscious projections. And I wondered if you could expound on that a little bit, because honestly, all of my projections that I have had, as when I'm done with them, it feels like memories, like things that have happened in my life, and it's not like a dream where I feel like there's some eraser that's coming cleaning up after my dream and trying to erase it as fast as possible, and if I don't write it down, I'll forget.
Well, that's okay. So in the past few years, I've been having a hard time remembering my projections. But when I talk about unconscious projections, a lot of times what I'll mean is like going up out of body and not realizing I'm out of body, where it's like it's so seamless with reality that it's like the line is completely blurred. Like in some of my scariest projections were just that, were unconscious projections. Like the one where I saw the man that was made out of nails. I was like, I woke up, I had, you know, the high-pitched buzzing noise, sleep paralysis. I did like the internal movement in my abdomen. That's how I snapped myself out of the state. And, you know, so I got up and I was like, nah, this room's a little bit too dark for me to be in. I need to go up. I need to go into the kitchen, get myself something to drink. And so went up into the kitchen, and then there's that nail man there. And it's like, oh, I'm actually having an out-of-body experience, you know. So So whenever I talk about unconscious OBEs, I mostly mean that. But like I said, in recent years, since I haven't been getting really great sleep with co-sleeping, like it's been like I remember having gone out of body and I remember doing things, but it's like I guess just not being fully aware in the state to where like almost like if you're doing things and like let's say you leave your keys somewhere because you weren't really fully there when you put your keys down, it's kind of like that, like just not really being fully there in the state. So when you try to remember back, it's like your mind can't quite place it. But it's not like a dream where it's like, oh yeah, I remember this snippet and that snippet, and it's still definitely a dream, but it's like really fuzzy. But it's just kind of like dull memory is how I would put it.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Well, the way that you put it there, I actually have experienced unconscious projections many times too, where I roll out and I'll get halfway down the hall or I'll get partially in my living room or something before I realize that something's wrong.
Yeah.
And I say, you know, hey, look, everything is just kind of glowing and just luminescent and oh, it's a different time of day than it is usually, or, you know, or something like that. And I notice something's wrong and I realize I'm projecting because it feels incredibly real. It's almost the same. It's the same feeling as just rolling out of bed in the morning.
Oh yeah, no, it's like very seamless. Like there's there's some times where like I'm like, am I actually doing it? You know, and so it kind of like almost like during the day, I almost have to ask myself, is this actually it? You know, like because it's so similar. You know.
Do you ever worry that you'll get to the point where you won't be able to tell?
Well, no, not too much. Not too much.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that because I'm rereading a book by Tom Campbell that I've read a couple of times, and he talks about how at one point he's traveling, you know, down a street and he's seeing all these various forms and like this pink billowy stuff that's hanging from the trees, and he's looking around to see if anybody else sees this stuff, and finally he realizes that what he's seeing is in the astral. And since then, he's learned to just shift his attention, so he's looking in the astral or looking in physical life and never has to go through the whole relaxation process.
Oh, that's interesting.
And when you get to that point where you can't tell the difference is where I think it would get a little bit frightening, but I'm far, far, far from that.
Yeah, same here. I don't even know what that would be like to just be able to switch gears like that. So have you ever dealt with like lack of control of the body while in astral?
Sort of. So, but maybe not the same way that you're describing. Typically, if I have a lack of control, it's more a lack of energy. And so there have been many times where I roll out and either I feel like I rolled out too soon or I just rolled out, you know, when I wasn't completely ready or something like that. And I'll be stumbling around my bedroom, like my legs just don't work quite right, which is kind of absurd because you don't really need to use your legs. You can easily lift up your legs and you could fly, but you're so used to these physical interactions with your environment that I still try to walk, which I need to get over that, but I still do. And so I'll be stumbling around and it's almost like being drunk or like being just completely just drained of energy. And I'll be grabbing everything, you know, on my dresser, trying to pull myself out of the room and trying to get away from my body as fast as I can. Because it seems to be that the further I get away from my body, the more things just brighten up naturally.
Oh yeah, no, I find that same thing too.
And but one other thing that I found that actually helps a lot, that I found in the last 6 months or so, is what Michael Raduga talks about in his book, and he calls it deepening. So what I found is that if my senses are really dulled in a projection, or I'm feeling kind of drunk and clumsy and just wobbling around, if you engage your senses when you're in that projected state, then it'll clear things up and things just become much more solid, and you gain control. So I'll just grab anything randomly. I'll grab the blanket off my bed and I'll shove it in my mouth and I'll start chewing it, and I'll walk out my room while I'm, you know, chewing on my blanket, and then I will, you know, grab other things and I'll pick them up and I'll look at them and scrutinize them really closely, and then that helps me, you know, engage my senses, and then things just clear up on their own is what I've found.
That's a great idea. Actually, that's what I do, like whenever I'm in like a lucid dream, like where I want to get everything kind of more solidified in the lucid dream, is I want to like look in things, like look in boxes, look at papers, explore the environment, and, you know, see what I see, what I hear, and try to make those senses really, really solid for me. So I haven't tried that in astral projection. Normally I just try to relax my body, like, or my astral body, I should say, and like kind of like relax emotionally and sort of tap into like a feeling of confidence, you know, like, you know, if you're normally walking, you know, you have this idea, like you you don't even think about like, oh yeah, my legs are carrying me. So I like try to tap into that carefree movement space. But I've had a lot of issues in the past where like I'll end up like basically sliding out of my body, and I'll end up like just hanging out right next to the bed, and I'll be like seeing the underneath of the bed, but I can't quite get like traction enough to pull myself up or to be able to move anywhere. Or another thing that I've had happen is like I'll get up out of body, and then it'll be almost like a bunch of little rubber bands are attached to me, and I just can't quite can't quite move. Like one time, and this is the furthest I ever got whenever I've had this kind of like rubber band sensation, is I walked out from my room through the hallway in through the living room here and right through that door back that way, and basically I got right to the outside, and like everything was like the same, but there were like these luminescent blocks like over, like almost like there was another path, because there's like a path outside of here, but it was like it went off in a different direction. But then I ended up snapping back out of it because I just couldn't quite get there to where I could get free of that like rubber band feeling.
Interesting. Yeah, I've had that rubber band feeling, but I've always associated it more to the feeling of like climbing out of a swimming pool. But it's usually during the separation, and then after that it's gone. It's not something that's continually, followed me.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I heard you say that analogy. I think that's a great analogy for getting up, because at first it's like this pressure, and then once you get past a certain point, it's like,
yeah,
usually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it is. Yep.
Hang on, let me take a look.
So I've got one for you.
Okay.
So it sounds like you have a good number of projections just spontaneously. Do you do anything to actively prepare for or attempt projections, or is it mostly just you rely on chance and periodic bouts of sleep paralysis?
Well, recently I've started to get back into trying, and this has been like in just the past couple of months and everything. But mostly in the past, it would just be like just randomly, like, like whenever I would get it, I might try, or I might get too scared and then I would like not try. So it just depended really on my emotional state and if I happened to get it. And I've been like fairly lucky in that, it just happened to come naturally to me. I think a lot of people, because the medical community sort of looks at sleep paralysis almost like a sleep disorder, but I always thought, like, what a grand opportunity. So it was like whenever I could, get past those emotional hurdles and dealing with the fear, it was always like a great experience. But a lot of times they wouldn't pan out. So I've had far more experiences with just attempting out-of-body experience, and maybe only about, I want to say 1/3, 1/4 of the time am I actually able to get out of body. And at that, sometimes it turns out to not be a super autonomous experience. And I think that, it's interesting for me to see your channel, because I know that it's just been a couple years for you, right?
Yeah, 2.5 years. January of 2014, January 3rd was my very first one ever.
So it's sort of like, it's sort of very inspiring for me, because for me, it just happened like happenstance, and I never...
I've been jealous of you type of people for a long time.
Yeah, it just so happened to happen to me. And I think, in a sense, it was good, because it's like I know that I can get there, and, that's not a problem. But I think that, just not being aware of that whole process, for the first several years, that really, scared me to the process, because it was like, oh, every time this is happening, I'm being possessed or something, something scary. But then once I learned it, then I had like this skeptical, like didn't want to seem too woo-woo, wanted to seem very rational, and like wanted to write it off like, oh yeah, the astral plane, that's just a hallucination, this is that, which is fine as an interpretation. But I think that during that time I didn't take it super seriously. And so I find that for me personally, I never really took the time to learn the ins and outs like someone like you who just started a couple years ago purposefully. So you've read a lot more on it. And I think that in the past 2 years, you probably actually have had quite a bit more experience with it than I have had throughout the whole entire time that I've been doing it. So I'm really glad to be able to talk to you, and glad to have you on my channel too, because I feel like you've done a lot of experimentation that I haven't personally done.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I've put a lot of time and effort and a ton of experimentation into it. And I'm always looking for something new to read. If you ever come across a book or something, I'd be happy hear about it and see if I can add it to my book list, because I'm constantly looking for new books or new YouTube videos or anything new, just anything new I can try, because as far as I've come in the last 2.5 years, I feel like I am far, far, far from where I want to be. I read about people like Robert Monroe, who he had decades of experience, and he talks about thousands of experiences that he recorded.
Wow.
And I'm in like the dozens range. I'm far from 1,000. I just feel like there's a lot of stuff that I'm still missing as far as I've come.
Yeah, for me personally, I'm trying to think. I know that I've maybe had 1,000 sleep paralysis. No, probably not 1,000 sleep paralysis things at this point. Let me kind of do the math here. So I started when I was 13, and now I'm 27, so it's 14 years. Twice, let's say 25 times a year to make it kind of rounded out. So 25 times 14, 25 times 10 is 250. Yeah, so like more like 300 times probably I've had sleep paralysis, but maybe only a sixth of those have I had actual fully autonomous out-of-body experiences from, or even like just staying in the vicinity of my room kind of thing. So
that's still, what, 50? That's
yeah,
still brick.
Yeah, probably 50. That's probably accurate. That sounds about right.
Yeah, that's still great. Like I said, I would love to have that problem.
Yeah. And so I guess for me personally, like if I were to ask you anything, like I would say, like, what would you say is like one technique that you found to help you sort of get out of body, like actually in the sitting up process? Because oftentimes I'll lose it at that point if I can get past the fear hurdle. You know, a lot of times I'll be like in the at the sleep paralysis state, and I'll either try to get up, which is problematic for me because I usually move the small muscles of my abdomen to snap myself out of it, or I'll try to like project myself out, but sometimes that doesn't work if I don't have quite the confidence behind it. So I guess what would you suggest?
Well, there's a few different things that I do typically. Well, I would say probably 3 different methods that work best for me. First, so I really like Michael Raduga's different techniques. So he talks about the direct method, which is basically projecting without going to sleep, and the indirect method, which is basically projecting as soon as you wake up. And then he talks about projection through lucid dreaming, which I don't do quite as much. But if I'm using the direct method and I'm trying to project without sleeping first, usually I'll get into that void type state, you know, where your body's asleep and your mind's awake. And then I can do one of 2 things. I can either try to help the process along, and if I'm doing that, then it's usually through imagined motion. So I don't know if you've messed with imagined motion very much, but I found that it's a really powerful thing when you're in that state. So, you know, what I found is that a lot of the different projection exit techniques all have to do with imagined motion. So the rope technique, you're basically trying to feel that motion of climbing up a rope and going out of body. And the hammock technique, you're trying to feel that motion of swaying side to side. And I got this idea from a different YouTube video. There was a guy, a video on Ask a Monk about astral projection, and he talks about how he was doing this hammock technique while he was meditating. And then at one point, he started swinging his hammock like this, round in circles, and at one point, he was just ejected out of his body. And I thought, I've never tried that. I've only ever tried this hammock motion back and forth. So I started picturing this forward and backwards, almost like a swing set type feeling. But that was really difficult for me to figure out how to swing upside down, because I'm not familiar with that. I've never swung upside down on a swing set. But then I got to thinking about it, and I thought, well, I've been on lots of roller coasters that go in loops. And so I started practicing inducing the sensation, you know, all the vestibular sensations and the sensation in your stomach, and just this actually feeling the movement of going around and around and around. And so what I found is if I'm in that void state and I can start doing loops in my mind and I can actually induce the motion sensation, then I'll have the same sort of experience. I'll just be ejected and just shot out of my body, and I'll just land somewhere random.
Oh, that's really cool. I've never actually heard of that one before. That one,
yeah, it works really well. I was going to say, if you practice meditation at all, maybe spend some of your meditation time practicing inducing movement, and maybe listen to audio tracks that help that. So I've been experimenting with that, and I've been making audio tracks that have like a 3-dimensional sound that rotates around in circles and try to help me focus and help me basically pretend that I'm spinning in circles and trying to induce that sense of movement.
That's really
cool. And that
cool.
helps. when you're helps when you're in that state. So then the other option when I get into that state, if I don't want to try to force that and try to just get shot out wherever I happen to land, is I actually also took from Michael Raduga. It works really well, and it's basically going through a number of he calls it micro sleep, or I think of it as little micro blackouts, where you just let yourself dip into sleep and then pull yourself back out again just a second or two later. And every time you dip in and dip back out again, you get closer and closer to that borderline, that threshold between awake and asleep. And as soon as you just kind of flatline right on that borderline where you can, like, you hear yourself snoring because your body's asleep and your mind's awake, the process just seems to evolve on its own. And you start hearing noises in your ears. And if you kind of ignore those and just let them happen, and you just continue doing whatever you did to cause those noises to start in the first place, then they'll build in frequency and vibration, and eventually I'll get to the point where I can just see my room through my sleep mask and my eyelids, and at that point I can just roll right out, and there's never any risk of me moving my physical body, because at that point it's almost always guaranteed, if I can see through my eyelids, that I'm disconnected enough where I can just roll right out and I can just move on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think, like you were mentioning, like with the sounds, like one way I find that like getting up out of body becomes easier for me is if I actually take the time to like consciously speed up and slow down the sound. Like, and I don't know how to exactly describe the movement. There's some kind of internal movement where I know that I can make it go faster and slower, and then eventually it hits a point where it's sort of like the sound stabilizes and like hits a point of equilibrium. And I find that once I hit that point, it becomes easier for me to get out of body.
For you, are the sounds like these swishing type pulsing sensations?
Yeah, it's sort of like, the way I would describe it is it's a mix between like radio fuzz and a flying saucer from a cheesy 1960s sci-fi movie. Like, it's like that, those two sounds like mixed together, but they have like, it's not always an even thing. Like, it's almost like the sounds that I'm hearing in both ears almost kind of like have like a shh kind of way of going. And it seems like whenever I hit that point of equilibrium, they're like the same. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, that's exactly what I experience. It's for me, it's a pulsating type radio type static sound, and the longer I let it go, usually the faster it'll go, and it'll speed up and speed up and speed up until it's just one continuous roar, and then it's really, really loud and intense and fills my whole head.
So for me personally, a lot of people will talk about the astral plane, and they'll talk about it being like this like heavenly kind of place, you know, where like you'd almost mentioned that like things were sort of iridescent at one state. And like for me, I've experienced like individual things here and there that have like an iridescence to it, but I've never been fully immersed in like a reality that was really fantastical. Most things seem like mostly like mundane life with just like maybe slight differences here and there. So have you ever experienced anything like that could be described as like the astral plane, like in the terms of it being very majestic looking?
Yeah, only once. So it's never really dark when I get out. It's everything, if it is dark in the room, everything sort of has like that iridescent glow, so I can still see everything. I've never had an experience where I just can't see anything in the room, but everything usually is very physical reality, like very earth-like. Yes. I've had one experience only where I got to the void type state, and so I'm laying there and I'm just floating around in this blackness, and just kind of waiting for this process to continue on its own. And this was after I had gone to the Monroe Institute, and they talk a lot about, you know, asking for help and, you know, requesting help from your higher self or from helpers or from whoever you think that is out there that can help you. And that was something I had never done before. And so at one point I just said, kind of in my mind said, you know, if anybody's out there, I'd really like to see something new. And that led to me being dragged out of my bed by my ankles and carried through the sky and then dropped onto some completely other, it was like a completely other planet, a completely different planet, like green with lakes and things like that, but nothing touched the ground.
Oh, that's interesting.
A strange sensation. So I was dropped and I landed maybe just, you know, a foot or two above the ground, and there's all these relics and statues and all these crazy symbols and things like that, just all floating off the ground, and nothing actually ever touched the ground. And that was the only unearth-like type environment that I've ever visited. Everything else has been very much physical reality.
That's really interesting. Yeah, see, for me, it's all been pretty much like physical reality. I mean, there have been things like I can do things that are not like physical reality, like flying, or, you know, sometimes I'll see like different things that just aren't supposed to be where they're at, or I can go through doors. Like one time I actually jumped into my front door back there and everything went gray. And I had set the intention that I wanted to go to Paris. I don't know if I ended up in a place that was Paris or what, but I basically, out of the gray, there started becoming like all of these faces sort of popping out. And I realized that I was on like this pedestrian walkway, and I was like right in the face of these two teenage girls who were having a conversation on a bench. And I realized I was just like too close for comfort. So I backed up and I ended up walking off, and I ended up finding this whole other like road system with like a mountain that was behind it and a stream next to it. And I thought, oh, let me check actually and see if this stays consistent, you know. And so I walked down the road a bit and I came back and I was like, oh, it actually is consistent. And so it was like, you know, it was a very majestic place, but it wasn't like some place that I couldn't have seen on planet Earth, you know. So
Right.
so it's been things that have been like traveling far distances, or presumably far distances, or like, you know, being able to jump into my door and go a place, but never like what's normally thought of as the astral plane with all the like clouds and iridescent stuff and all kinds of magical stuff.
Yeah, all the different multiple levels that people talk about. I have yet to see a lot of that.
Yeah, same. Yeah, for me, I'm really hoping that here in the next, you know, couple months that I can start gaining more traction with my astral projection practice, because for me, for a long time, I guess I had kind of like put it on the back burner and sort of treated it like it was not super important. But for me, I find that like it's something that I really do crave to do, you know, and I want to be able to develop further, you know, so that I can actually go and do more things, because it's never, even when I have like scary experience, it's never feeling like, oh, this was a wasted experience, or, you know, feeling like, oh, I always like having had it, even if during the time it was scary, because I feel like it's like it's almost like a privilege to be able to experience all of these things that most people may not be able to experience in their whole life, you know. So it's, you know, it's really interesting.
So what is it that motivates you to try to practice it, or what do you hope to accomplish when you project?
I think like the main thing, and I think this has always been what's been most interesting, is the thought of being able to be more aware in a different state of consciousness, to increase my awareness in general. But then also, of course, you know, it's very interesting to think that, oh, I can have experiences in this state where I'm not beholden to the limitations of the physical body, and I can go and do those things. So I think it's like twofold. Like, so like self-exploration and just seeing how I am in different environments or in that different mind state, but then also just being able to have those interesting and novel experiences. How about you?
Pretty much the same. I would say throw in there that I just really like flying.
Yeah.
I would say I probably spend 50% of my time out just flying. Lately, I've been doing more experiments and trying to go to places I haven't seen before, and trying to interact with people and have, you know, like physically verifiable evidence that this is real or that this isn't real, or, you know, things like that, because a lot of people are interested in that kind of thing. And I've had a lot of people ask me, hey, can you try to prove that this is real? And so I feel like I should give that a try. You know, it's an interesting experiment. I've been unsuccessful at this point.
Yeah, same here.
But I would say by far my favorite thing to do is just get out and just fly.
Yeah, definitely flying is pretty interesting. For me personally, I'm a little afraid of heights, so it's like, it's sort of a love-hate relationship. Like, as long as I feel like I'm in control completely when I'm flying, then that's wonderful and magical. There has been one time, though, that sticks out to me. I was actually staying over at my husband's house back when we were just dating, and I ended up like out on the road in front of like where his bedroom was, and I realized, oh, I'm having an out-of-body experience. I just happened out there. I didn't get up out of body, but I was just there, and it was like I didn't have control over my body from like the knees up. but like from my knees down, like my legs were stiff and they were like floating upward, like almost like levitating out of my control. And so it was almost like my body was like trying to get control, but like my whole body was also floating up. So that one was a little bit scary. But I have had other times where I've been flying and it's been really a wonderful experience.
And do you always have a body when you get out? I mean, like you always have a physical or a replica of your physical body?
It feels that way. Like I think, you know, if I'm in like that void state, like where everything's just black, then it's just like I'm just a floating consciousness. But there's always this feeling that I have a body, but I don't think I ever thought to look, except for one time when I was 15. I got out and I had the sort of tumbling over myself thing, and I was looking in the mirror, and so I was able to actually see my body do this, but I was actually able to see up underneath the bed. And so that was like a really like, and again, this was a time when I wasn't aware of like sleep paralysis or, you know, any of that process. So it was like, oh my goodness, it's really happening, you know, that type of thing. But I guess, hang on, I sort of lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Where was I going with
No,
that?
I was just curious because I've always had
having body.
a replica of my physical body when I get out. I always feel like I'm the same person and the same, you know, arms and legs and everything that I am in physical life. And I was curious because some authors write about how at some point you just lose the need for a physical body and you lose the desire to have one because you just decide, you know, I'm better off without one. I'm better off as this floating point of consciousness that can just soar around the universe and do anything that it wants. And with you having had 50 plus experiences over your years, I wondered if you had gotten to the point where you no longer are attached to that idea of having a physical body.
No, I think I'm still very attached to that, definitely, when I'm interfacing with like any kind of reality. But during that void state, it's always just like floating consciousness. And I've had that only a few times. So basically it'll be just like all dark, and it like just feels like I'm floating, but it doesn't feel like I'm floating with the body. It's just like my consciousness is just there, you know.
Right.
And it almost is a little bit of a timeless state. There's nothing really for me to grab a hold of, but it also it's not so different from the normal astral projection state that I wouldn't be able to connect the two together. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I love the void state.
Yeah, I was surprised actually. I think I had commented on one of your videos, I'm pretty sure, and you had said that like that was one thing. I forget what you'd said about it, but you said that it was something that you got pretty often. For me personally, I think I've gotten the void state 3 times with astral projection, but then there were a couple of dreams also where I hit like a similar type void state just one time. And again, this is a dream. It wasn't an astral projection experience, but I was basically swallowed whole by this hag, and I was like floating through time and space, and that had that void sort of state too. And so this was like a really vivid dream that I felt like actually had a lot of commonalities with the void state from astral projection, even though normally astral projection and dreams feel very different for me. And then also there was one time that I basically ended up going up through this like window it looked like a painting by William Turner. Are you familiar with that artist?
I'm not, no.
Basically, he was a landscape painter working in the 1800s, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and the colors he used in his landscapes were really, really bright and vibrant. But basically, I was like sucked up into this window, and outside of the window, it looked like a William Turner painting. But I was sucked through that window, and it was that same kind of void state. Have you ever experienced the void state in any dreams?
Not in any dreams. I've had dreams that have become lucid, and then from the lucid dream state, I can induce the vibrations just on a dime, just really, really easily. I just think about the vibrations, and then they'll just kick off, and then I can wake up, and I'll be mid-vibration, and I can roll out. But the void state usually, in fact, I would say 99 to 100% of the time, I induce it after I put my body to sleep. You know, I've kept my mind awake, my senses have all shut off, so, you know, I hear my hearing will just click off, and so I just can't hear anything anymore except for just the internal noise, and my vision clicks off, which is sort of a strange thing to think about because I've got a sleep mask on, it's already dark, but you've always got those internal shapes and lights and things like that you see on the inside of your eyelids.
Yeah, yeah.
And at some point, after you put your body to sleep, and I go through these micro blackouts and dip in and out a few times, my sight will click off. So it's like flipping off a light switch, and all of that whatever it is just turns off, and it's just complete blackness.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is very interesting. Yeah, because if you think about it, you're always kind of looking at something, even if you're looking at the inside of your eyelids, which you tend to think of as, oh yeah, I'm not looking at anything, but you're still looking at something. But in that void state, it does seem like it's just a complete vacuum where there's nothing.
Yeah, so it's a state that I tend to induce rather than just get put into from like a dream standpoint, like you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. Let me look again.
Just want to give you a heads up. I got about 5 or 6 minutes, and I got to get to bed since I've got an early day of work tomorrow.
Okay. Do you want to ask the last question?
I want to ask the last one. Let's see. What have we not talked about yet? Okay, well, let's talk about this because this is something I'd be interested in hearing your opinion on. What would you say are the best resources for somebody that's learning to astral project from a YouTube video perspective, a guided meditation perspective, a reading perspective, books, whatever you've come across? What's the best resource that you can think of?
Well, personally, for me, like most of mine has just been kind of like playing it by ear and sort of like doing it from my perspective. But I would say like really like listening to videos, things like that. I think like your channel would actually be a great resource for someone wanting to come and learn how to astral project or about the benefits of doing so. And I think, just learning about the sleep cycle, like anything that like will kind of help you time out when you're most likely to have your sleep paralysis bouts. And so, anything that's basically going to give you more information about the way your body works and the way the sleep cycle functions, I would say would be the best advice that I could give.
Actually, that's a really good point. So I have a Fitbit, like, the bracelets that you wear.
Oh, yeah.
And it also tracks your sleep cycle, which I found is an interesting thing because you can look at that, and typically you go in these 90-minute cycles, right? You've got the light sleep, deep sleep, and REM sleep, and then you wake up and you repeat the process a few times during the night. And I can see in my sleep tracker on my phone that this Fitbit is recording. I can see when my REM cycles are because typically right after them, I'll either roll over or I'll wake up and I get up and go to the bathroom or get a drink or come back to bed or whatever. And it's every 90 minutes, so it's almost just like clockwork, the same time every single night.
That is awesome. See, I did not know that.
Yeah. If you got something like that, you can plan for that, and you can wake yourself up preemptively and, take advantage of that time frame and use that as part of your wake back to bed, practice that you go through.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a really good point.
Actually, that reminds me because I just learned about ramp timers on your channel. And so I think maybe doing a ramp timer also would be good. Like if you could kind of like find one that times out for your REM cycle, I think that would be a great resource to look into as well.
Yeah, those are really good if you can, like you said, if you can nail your sleep cycle and your REM sleep, the portion of your sleep that's REM sleep, because so much of that is just based on luck. If you haven't really studied out when you have REM sleep and when you've got deep sleep, then I found the ramp timers more frustrating than anything.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So it really does take some effort beforehand to say, today I woke up at 11 p.m. Even if you don't have something like a Fitbit to help you track it, keep track of when you wake up in the night and say, was I just dreaming 2 seconds ago? And if you were, then that was one of your REM cycles, and write that down, keep track of the time, and try to track out your sleep cycle. And that way you can more effectively use something like a ramp timer that's going to wake you up repeatedly and hopefully land on those REM cycle periods and make the most of them instead of just make you exhausted in the morning.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that's a really great bit of advice there. Yeah, so I think you had said, and I'm trying to remember back to your video where you were talking about your very first time. Yeah, did you get that using a ramp timer, was it?
I did. Yeah, so that was the very first time, and I said, I had gone through these YouTube videos looking for information about lucid dreaming, and I came across astral projection and Nicholas Newport and him talking about how he's going to help you get out of body. And I said, this is just utter nonsense. And so, yep, I took the ramp timer because Nicholas Newport, in his words, calls it the super sneaky cheat method of getting out of body.